Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shalom, Bwana asifiwe. Wanafuse, napokea sana message zenu, napokea sana DM zenu, naona comment zenu. Sio kwamba nakutengeni, mnatakiwa muelewe kwamba huwa najitahidi kubalance katika maisha yangu. Kuna kodi zinatakiwa zilipwe, kuna maisha yanatakiwa yaende, ila at the end of the day pia nina haki kwa wanafuse kwa sababu ya imani yao juu yangu. Mimi lazima niwe nawatimizia nao haki zao. Kwa hiyo najitahidi kubalance. Kuna hii interview ambayo nimeifanya Dodoma. Huyu dada ni msomi, specialize katika haya mambo. Nishaongelea kuhusu madeni na jinsi tunavyolazimishwa na tunavyotegwa na madeni Afrika, na baada ya kumsikiza udada nimefunguka akili jinsi hali ilivyo mbaya, kwa sababu ni mtaalamu, amezitoa kwa statistics. Kwa hiyo hali kwa kweli ya madeni ya Mwafrika ni mbaya, na sasa hivi kuna madeni ambayo yametengenezwa maalum kwa ajili ya rasilimali. Yani kawaida huwa kuna kitu kinaitwa collateral unapoenda kuchukua deni, kwa maana kwamba au rehani kwa Kiswahili. Sasa collateral ambayo inatumika sasa hivi ni rasilimali zetu. Nyinyi mna dhahabu, nyinyi mna cobalt, nyinyi mna almasi, nyinyi mna mafuta, nyinyi mna gesi. Kwa hiyo hizo rasilimali ndio zitakuwa dhamana yenu kwa mikopo yetu, na nishaongelea madhara yake. Sasa huyu dada ni mtaalamu, tumsikilize. Nimefanya naye interview kwa Kiingereza. Nilikuwa natamani sana nije ni tafsiri alafu ni dadavue. Kama mnavyojua mimi sio mtangazaji. Mimi ni mtu ambaye Mungu tu amenijalia akili, kwa hiyo najitahidi hiyo akili kilichopo ni share na wenzangu. So nilitamani ni tafsiri alafu nifanyie udadavuzi, kwa maana kwamba nijaze nyama, lakini muda sio rafiki. Imebidi tu nitoe kwanza kwa Kiingereza chake. Ambao wataweza kuelewa wataelewa, ambao hawataweza tutaitafutia muda kwa ajili ya kuiongelea kwa Kiswahili na kuijaza nyama. Na shukrani za dhati kwa Afrodads. Hawa ningeshauri pia muende mkawaangalia. Ni watu ambao naweza nikasema tuko nao pamoja, na sikujua kwamba kuna watu wa aina hii, lakini nimefurahi kwa maana kwamba ni watu ambao wanajitahidi kuelimisha Waafrika kuhusu madhara ya madeni, jinsi ya ukusanyaji kodi sahihi, na jinsi ya kuandaa policies au sera sahihi za mikopo pamoja na rasilimali zetu. Na nilipokuwa kule kulikuwa kuna mwakilishi wa TRA, nikaongea naye. Kuna mambo ambazo concerns zangu nilikuwa nazo, akasema amezisikiliza, atazifanyia kazi, na akifika Dar es Salaam atanitafuta. Nilikutana na ndugu zangu wa TIRA. Sijawahi kukutana na taasisi yoyote ya kiserikali ambayo ni bora kushinda TIRA. Na ninakwambia ni wanafuse, kama umepata ajali na umefuata vigezo vyote na insurance wanakusumbua, nenda TIRA, utakuja kunishukuru. Hawa jamaa sijakutana na taasisi ya serikali ambayo inafanya kazi kwa kujitolea na kwa ubora na ufanisi kama TIRA. Kwa hiyo kuna mengi sana ambayo nimeyakuta Dodoma, ila ningependa kushare na nyinyi interview. Kuna mambo mengi kusema kweli, wanafuse nazidiwa. Kuna issue ya Gaza kule bado mambo yanaendelea. Kuna Ben Gurion's Canal bado sijaifanyia kazi. Kuna ile route nyingine, kuna issue ile ya India na mchongo wake mwingine ambao sijaiongelea. Kuna mambo yanaendelea Kongo ambao ni hali ni mbaya sana. Kuna vitu vinaendelea Sudan. Mambo ni mengi kusema kweli, wanafuse. Kuna vitu vinaendelea Ukraine, nazidiwa, lakini nitajitahidi kwanza nitoe video moja ambayo nitazigusia kwanza, nifanye kama update, then from there tuendelee pamoja. Wanafuse, kama mnavyojua na kupendeni, one love. Tusikilize hii, watakaweza kuielewa ataelewa, ambao wataweza basi tuvumiliane. Nitakapopata muda then nitakuja kuiandaa kwa Kiswahili chake.
Wanafuse, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shalom, Bwana asifiwe. Nipo Dodoma kama nilivyokuambieni. Nimekuja kwenye mkutano ambao kama unavyoona hapa, jukwaa la uziduaji Extraction Conference, na nimekutana na watu ambao Mungu amewajalia elimu, and nipo na dada, ni Mwafrika na ni msomi, na nitamruhusu ajitambulishe. Ameongelea na nadhani kwenye Fuse shongelea mambo ya deni na madhara yake na jinsi yalivyotengenezwa kwa ajili sisi wa Afrika. Kwanza ajitambulishe, alafu atatuelewesha ametokea wapi na wanadeal na nini ili tuweze kumuelewa. So I was just doing a brief introduction in Swahili. I've just told them about the conference. I would like you to introduce yourself, where you come from, and who do you work with and what do you deal with?
Thank you very much. My name is Afshin Nazir.
Yeah.
I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I'm currently the acting policy advocacy and research officer at the African Forum and Network on Data and Development. We call it AFRODAD. So AFRODAD is a civil society not-for-profit organization It's based in Harare, Zimbabwe. Yes, though we do have teams in Kenya, in Cameroon. We work on a continental level mostly.
Okay.
We are very Pan-African. So we work on issues of debt, development, and tie them in with the continents. So the main agenda is to make Africa a rule maker, not a rule taker. So we do work
The main agenda is to make Africa.
a rule maker and not a rule taker.
Okay, fantastic.
And I can see that is something
Yes.
that you're interested in.
Very much.
And then we do partner with people at the national levels in Africa, regional, continental, and we also have global partnerships.
Okay.
So that is a gist of some of the things we do. We deal with things like debt, justice, natural resource governance, illicit financial flows, but debt being at the center of everything we do.
So, thank you very much. After the introduction, we'll try to make this as brief as possible. So my number one question is, why do Africans need debt to fund our budgets?
So it comes down to us as at individual level even. Why do we borrow when we don't have money?
Okay.
So even as nations, we have fiscal gaps. And we have those fiscal gaps because we can't raise enough revenue. And one of the reasons for this is our very limited tax base. The tax net in African countries, it varies. Like in Malawi, for example, you'll see 0.2% of the registered voters are taxpayers. In Senegal, 1%. In Namibia, it's a bit higher, 55%. But most countries range below that 50% mark. South Africa is doing really well with around 99%. But you can see there's a country here with 0.2% and another one here with 99%. Yeah, it's a huge gap. It's like almost 0 and almost 100. So it's a huge gap. So our tax nets usually are the problem. We can't raise enough revenues because of our limited tax nets. Then debt itself is not a bad thing, but it's just that our debt stocks are going high very quickly. Between 2010 and 2021, our debt stocks have risen by 183%.
180% in 10 years, 11 years.
183%. So debt is not bad, but the rate at which we are taking debt is serious. So one reason is that we've normalized fiscal deficits, not fiscal surpluses. We never think of we have extra. We're always thinking of how much less will we have.
So I would say it's an ideological thing that we've normalized getting debts. Rather do we talk about maybe this year we'll have a surplus. So it's become normal. So even the individuals, the citizens and the policymakers have accepted we'll always have a deficit.
It's become so normalized having that fiscal deficit that having a fiscal surplus, it's almost something none of us ever really think about.
It's very true. Personally, I've also never thought of it. And do you know of any country in Africa who has ever had a surplus?
I'm personally not aware, but I have not researched on this, so I can.
Okay, I've never had, but I'll also ask a few members if you know of any country in Africa who has a debt or not debt, budget surplus. So 2 questions from what you just said, very briefly. So one of the problems is taxation. Is it the policy, or is it how we collect the revenues, or what is the problem? And another thing, since we have a deficit, is it that we overspend? That's why we need extra? Is it possible to reduce the expenditure so that we break even with what we collect?
Okay, those are interesting questions. So with the first one, you talked about the problem. Wait, please just remind me, this slipped my mind.
So the first one was, you said the problem is the way we collect revenue.
Oh, yes.
So
Everybody.
is it a policy problem, or is it the way we collect revenue? There's a lot of loose revenues that we lose a lot of revenue.
Okay, I think one of the problems is we have very large informal sector. And informal sectors are usually left out of the tax net.
Okay.
So we end up losing revenue from there. We're not generating enough revenue because if the tax net is limited, then we are burdening this small group of people to raise revenue. We can't raise that much from them at the end of the day. Then in terms of your second question, are we overspending? I do not think we are overspending. I think we're not raising enough to meet our expenditure needs, because many times you hear these discussions of we need more health financing, we need more education financing. So we're not overspending, we just don't have it. We are not raising enough. Not that we don't have enough, we are not being able to raise enough.
Okay. So okay, that's I like the way you put it. My second, are debts good for our short and long-term interests of African to be self-sustained?
It depends.
Okay.
A debt is good if it's sustainable. Debt becomes bad when it's not sustainable.
Okay, can you briefly explain how is it sustainable? How can it be unsustainable?
So, for example, if you look at debt to GDP ratios,
Okay.
and let's say your debt to GDP ratio is, let's say you have 80% of your budget in terms of debt.
Okay.
If your debt level is that high, you're using a lot of your money to service debt. It becomes unsustainable.
Okay.
So
Okay.
sustainable debt is that debt you can actually manage to pay in a proper way, not the way we are struggling.
In a comfortable way without straining yourselves.
Yes, at least not too much. So, but at the moment, talking about Africa's self-sustainment, last year, 8 countries were in debt distress and 11 were at high risk of debt distress.
Yeah.
This year, 11 were in debt distress, 25 at high risk. So the numbers are just increasing for us. The way it's going at the moment, we are in a debt crisis. So debt for us is not looking like the good debt; it's looking like the bad debt. Yes, and also it impacts our sovereignty because the loans that come, they come with conditions. Do this, put these policies in place, put those policies in place. So that takes away from our sovereignty even as a nation. So debt, the way it's going, it's a debt crisis. It's not good, sustainable debt.
Okay. So thank you about that. I actually have follow-up questions, but since we're trying to make this as brief as possible, I'll write them down to you and you can reply me even through an email or message. So my third question is, why is resources-rich African countries, one, the poorest, or the poorest and the most heavily in debt?
That's a good question also. I think we should not be looking at we should be actually. We should look at the PPP, not in the traditional sense of public-private partnerships, but in terms of power, policies, and people. So where's the power? Or what are the policies?
Okay.
And where do the power and the policies work in the interest of the people? So when the power, policies, and people will align, that's when it will work for Africa. So some ways in which resource-rich countries actually end up losing revenues through illicit financial flows. When IFFs, I'll just be saying IFFs, when IFFs increase, you will also see debt increasing. So as we're losing money through, and the mining sector is also one of those avenues through which we lose money. So with countries which have minerals, they do have IFFs in that sector as well. Not that it's the only source of revenue loss, but IFFs are a reason for loss of that revenue. So as IFFs increase, so do debts. Then another thing is also resource-backed loans.
Resource-backed
loans.
Okay.
So you'll take loans using your resources as collateral. And then sometimes the value of the minerals is worth more than the value of the loan even. So we end up becoming poor, not because resource-backed loans are a bad thing, but because they're not rightly structured.
Okay. So it goes back to what you said. We end up losing our sovereignty because it's like you're given a piece of metal in exchange for gold or something. So you're getting debt and you're giving you're ransoning your natural resources. Okay. So you at Afrodads, with what you do, you deal with these things, you do research and everything. So generally, what have you discovered and what do you think is the right way forward?
Okay. One of the key things is that the global debt and financial architecture is broken.
Okay.
It does not favor Africa. So the loans even we are taking, for example, when we get loans and then they come with austerity measures, those types of loans end up, for example, they'll say cut social spending, stop spending on healthcare, on education. And this is something that we've discovered makes you actually poorer in the long run. So there's a broken debt, a global debt and financial architecture, and there's a lot of debate on how to reform it. There's debates constantly on reforming the global debt and financial architecture. So that's one of the key problems. The other thing is the increase of private lending.
Okay.
So between, again, 2010 and 2021, private lending has increased from, I think 30% to 44%. And the problem with the private lending is that it comes first of all with high interest loans, and then it's not development centered, it's very profit centered. So we are paying so much in interest because of those loans. There's a 132% increase in our interest payments because we are now switching to private lending more because it's easier. But at the end of the day, it costs us more.
Thank you very much. Actually, a lot of things that you've also said need to go a little bit deeper in order for people to understand. But since this is a very brief, thank you very much. Thanks to Afrodads as well. What I'm looking for that once you go back in Nairobi and settle, and I go back to Dar es Salaam, we could have an online, maybe 1 or 2 hours, because this is things that I'd like to get deeper for us Africans to understand. So wanafuse, asanteni sana, tumefanya interview, baadaye nitaitranslate kwenu ili muweze kuelewa, ni vitu ambavyo vya msingi sana. Wanafuse, kulikuwa kuna mengi ya kuyaongelea, lakini kutokana na muda tumeifanya very brief. Ila nilichomuomba ni kwamba nikirudi Dar na yake rudi Nairobi, tutafanya live conference ya between mimi na yeye, and kwa vile itakuwa live itatoa fursa kwa wanafuse ambao pia ni wataalamu wa mambo ya uchumi waweze kuchangia. Lakini vile vile kama mtu una swali ungependa kuuliza live, au kuna kitu ungependa kuwa msikilizaji, au ungependa kuchangia hoja, itakapokuwa tayari nitashare na nyinyi Fuse. DJ Sma kutoka Dodoma, mji mkuu wa Tanzania. One love. Mkiona sipo online ujue tuko kwenye pirika za elimu. Wana Fuse, one love.
Tukutane kwenye comment section, wengine tukutane kwenye group Fuse VIP, kuna Fuse General WhatsApp channel, hakikisha unaifollow ili upate updates zote kwa wepesi, sababu kuna updates zingine ambazo siziweke kwenye makala ila huwa natuma tu kwenye Fuse channel. Kwa hiyo unaweza ukaifollow. SNS pia wana channel yao, unaweza ukaifollow. Link ziko chini ya hii video. Usipoiona comment pale, mimi nitakuandikia link. One love. It's your techie DJ Smart 255 hapa SNS. Unaweza ukanifollow on my Instagram DJ Smart 255, YouTube channel DJ SMA 255, Threads DJ Smart 255, Snapchat DJ Sma 255.
DJ Sma. Easy.